Captain Bones. On a warm summer's evening, a long, long time ago, a young boy called Pip sat on the steps of the Crow's Nest Inn as the church clock struck 10. Inside the inn, Uncle Ned sat chatting to a stranger, while Pip listened to three fishermen telling a fantastic tale. "Bones," said the tallest man. That was his name, Captain William Bones. Hanged 100 years ago to this day he was, for luring ships onto these rocks and murdering the crews and stealing their cargoes. He's buried over there in the churchyard, and some say his ghost still walks. Has anyone ever seen him?" asked Pip. "Aye, lad, I have. An horrible sight he is, with the chains he was hanged in draped around his neck." Pip was so excited that he jumped up from the doorstep. The tall man just laughed. "He might even walk tonight, young Pip. He often does on full moons, so you'd best keep well out of the way." The three fishermen swigged down the rest of their ale and left the inn. Pip took the tankards back inside. The stranger had already disappeared, and Uncle Ned was sweeping out the bar. Pip wiped down the tables, blew out the flames in the oil lamps, and went upstairs. "Night, Uncle Ned." "Good night, Pip. Sleep well, and pleasant dreams." But lying in his room, with the full moon rising and the waves crashing on the rocks far below, Pip could not sleep a wink. For an hour or more he lay there, then slipped back into his clothes, crawled out through his bedroom window, and slid down the drainpipe to the ground. An owl hooted, and a cloud passed in front of the moon as Pip climbed over the churchyard wall. Peering in the dim light, he went from tombstone to tombstone, searching for the name of Bones. At last he found it. In the far corner of the churchyard, almost hidden by an old yew tree, was a large, square tomb surrounded by iron railings. Pip could just make out the name, Captain William Bones. The moon came out again from behind the clouds, and Pip pressed his face against the railings to read the rest of the words. Suddenly, a gate in the railings swung open. Pip tumbled through and went up to the door of the tomb itself. He noticed a brass handle on the front of the tomb, glinting in the moonlight. Scarcely daring to breathe, Pip grasped the heavy handle and pulled it firmly. The massive stone slab creaked open. To his amazement, he found himself not inside the sealed tomb, but at the top of a narrow flight of steps. The air was musty, and a bat flashed past him into the churchyard, skimming through his hair. Pip shuddered, but he could not stop now. He crept silently down the steps, a shaft of moonlight guiding his way. Then suddenly, with a hollow thud, the tomb door swung closed behind him. Pip was trapped in the dark. All he could do was follow the steps down. They were mossy in places and very slippery, but he edged his way steadily downward, gripping tightly to a rope fixed to the wall. Down and down he went, deep into the earth, until at last he heard the sound of the sea. Then he saw moonlight sparkling on white surf, and found himself in the mouth of a cave, half closed by a large boulder. Pip stepped out into a rocky inlet. There was no sign of a path back up the jagged cliffs, but at least he was in the open air and could look for a way to escape. Perhaps he could even swim to safety. Then Pip saw a ship's light, and his blood froze. A small boat was coming round the headland, and on its prow stood a tall skeleton, with a heavy, rusting chain dangling from its neck, and carrying a lantern. It was the ghost of Captain Bones. Pip ducked back down behind the boulder, his hair standing on end, and watched in terror. Two eerie figures, draped in ghostly white, rowed the boat noiselessly up to the beach. The skeleton sprang ashore and peered anxiously up and down. Then it walked rapidly across the sand, straight towards the cave. Pip knelt behind the boulder, unable to move. As the hideous figure marched towards him, its great sea boots squelching in the sand. Then a white, bony hand reached out across the rock and tried to grab him by the hair. "I'm Bones, Captain Bones, pirate wrecker and slayer of children. What are you doing on my beach?" In a blind panic, Pip dashed into the cave and up the mossy stairway as fast as he could run. Several times he slipped on the moss, grazing both knees on the hard stone steps, but he kept running. Close behind him came the ghost, his chain rattling louder and louder, his heavy boots slapping on the steps. In a frenzy of horror, Pip ran faster still. But what would he do when he reached the top? The tomb door was locked, and there was no way out but down. Still the ghost came closer, roaring out his name. "Bones, Captain Bones, pirate wrecker, slayer of children, I'll use your bones to pick my teeth." But at that moment, the tomb door opened, and there at the entrance stood the stranger from the inn with Uncle Ned and a group of men beside him. They were all armed with muskets. The ghost cursed loudly, then turned and fled. A strong hand seized Pip's arm and hauled him through the door. "All right, laddie, you're safe now. Just stay here out of the way while we deal with Captain Bones." And at a sign from the stranger, 6 men hurried down the steps. Pip lay under the yew tree, gasping and panting, until he caught his breath. Then Uncle Ned explained what had happened. "That was no ghost, Pip. These men are brandy smugglers, and the stranger is a customs man. He's been hunting the gang for weeks and was listening to the stories at the inn tonight just as carefully as you. When he heard that the ghost might walk, he summoned his men and asked me to come along too." A few minutes later, 3 dejected figures, wrapped up in sheets, were hustled up the steps from the tomb. The tallest man wore a vast black sheet with a brilliant white skeleton painted on it. And when the customs men pulled the sheet away, there stood the fisherman Pip had listened to outside the inn not 3 hours before. The church clock struck 1 as Pip and his uncle crossed the cobble street back to the old inn door. Uncle Ned led Pip in and shot the bolts behind them. Pip sat quietly on the side of his bed, watching his uncle fasten the window tightly with a piece of rope. "I'm not having you climb out of there again," he said. Pip did not really mind at all, for the curses of Captain Bones were still ringing in his ears, and he was glad to be safe. And at last, with the owls hooting in the churchyard and the waves breaking on the rocks below, he fell fast asleep.